I think it's crucial. You don't always see in government people bringing what we call user-centered design. It's really thinking about the veteran, the doctor, the student, and how to put them at the center of the issue. And a lot of the times, if you just write the specifications and build software for a few years and don't actually talk to users, you don't end up with a good consumer experience.
Now, you worked at Google for many, many years where things move at light speed.
Yes.
Why move to government where things historically move very slowly?
Well, there's a couple reasons. First is just the mission and the impact. I mean, the meaningfulness of the ability to be able to see the impact that you can have is really deeply gratifying. The other thing is technology, you can cherry pick. You can just choose to serve one particular market. Government needs to serve everybody. And that really means that, you know, whenever you talk to somebody over a Thanksgiving dinner table, they are able to see, okay, this is the impact that it has on my life.
Has it been a bit of a culture shock for you, though?
Yes. We like to joke that the U.S. Digital Service is like a bridge in between the worlds of technology and government, and the two worlds don't always speak well together, so you can come into a safe spot and learn a little bit about how to speak the other language.
Now, you worked under the Obama administration, you're now working under the Trump administration. You don't set policy, but you execute. What has it been like working for two very different presidents? What's really gratifying is the fact that we care about implementing systems so that government systems that millions of people use work really well. And we've had support in both administrations. It's not a partisan issue to say technology in some cases is broken, and a system, whether it's a veteran getting her benefits or a student trying to figure out whether to go to a college, for them to get the information that they need and for that service to work well. So we've actually gotten great support, and we're gratified that we're able to make good progress. Now, the president is once again taking on Google, Facebook, Twitter, accusing them of bias. Is that fair? It's an interesting question. In my mind, I'm like levels down, where I'm just worried about, you know, if you have a particular doctor who wants to submit a payment for Medicare, does that system really work? I think it's really fun to talk about, you know, after hours in conversation and that sort of thing. But I think in the same way that DC doesn't always understand Silicon Valley doesn't always understand DC. And the more cross-pollination we have, probably the better for everybody. What does Silicon Valley need to understand better? In the era of techlash, I mean, there's been so much backlash against these companies. There has been. You know, I was at South by Southwest, and I sat down eating a hot dog at a table, and somebody pitched me on a startup that does augmented reality dance lessons. You know, and I think Silicon Valley can do a little more thinking about the sorts of services that everybody needs, not just a select few. We saw many of the Democratic presidential candidates gather there, and they are taking on big tech. We're also seeing state attorneys general in the early stages of exploring whether Google in particular presents an antitrust case. Do you think Google presents an antitrust case? So as someone who serves in the government, I don't want to take a position on that sort of thing. But from the time that I worked in government, there were a lot of very earnest people just working to make sure that the best quality of search results showed up. For me, it's a question of, you know, there's the Federal Trade Commission, there's the Department of Justice. People need to look at consumer harm and consumer good, and that's, you know, a question that people can look at. How about a broader question? Senator Elizabeth Warren saying big tech needs to be broken up. You know, Amy Klobuchar saying she wants an investigation. Do you think big tech more broadly needs to be broken up? For me personally, it's not a matter of breaking up so much as big companies should realize that they are probably going to be scrutinized. And I think most companies realize that and are, you know, starting to accept the fact that no matter what, they are going to have to think about their impact, not just amongst their consumers and their markets, but throughout the entire country and the world. You handle some of the most sensitive data about American citizens, medical records, for example. Google and Facebook have a lot of sensitive data about us. Is it clear at this point that we can't trust them with our data? So one thing that's kind of interesting is that if a tech company or any company loses the trust of its consumers, I think that people will start to leave it. They have the choice to take their data out or to stop using Facebook or whatever the company is. The part that interests me on a day-to-day basis is if you think about the U.S. government, what is the trust in the U.S. government and how can we make that work a little better? There was a poll that just came out where for the first time the U.S. government was listed as if it were a company, and of the top 100 companies, it was dead last. And so there's a lot of ways that technology can make government work better for everyday people. And yet we're continuing to see areas where technology is failing. I mean, there was just this mass murder in New Zealand, live video of it going up on Facebook and then getting reposted hundreds of thousands of times. You know, is that an example? In this case, they were almost powerless to stop their own power. So what can be done about that?
That's an interesting case because there is the notion of something that you don't want to show up, like spam. I used to work on spam on Google search results. And then there's also the notion of real-time things that you don't want to show up. So this idea of something going viral and people live streaming, you know, really terrible stuff, I suspect the tech companies just haven't had the time to adjust to that specific model. I would not be surprised if there's engineers throughout Silicon Valley thinking about how can they adjust so that that sort of thing doesn't happen as easily in the future.
Meantime, we're seeing tech companies increasingly work with the government, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and this has caused, you know, especially in Google's case, employee protests around Google's work with the Pentagon, such that Google actually ended a contract to help the government interpret aerial drone footage using Google AI. Is that a mistake?
I think reasonable people can have different viewpoints. I was talking to Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, recently. He came to visit at one of our staff meetings, and we got to ask him questions. And he had a really interesting position that said Microsoft is basically a platform, and the platform should allow all kinds of customers and clients to come in, and you can't anticipate all the different ways that somebody's going to use a platform. It is definitely the case that people are going to be grappling with these issues, you know, for quite some time to come. Well,
Nadella and Microsoft have actually made some different decisions than Google has. Google has actually said, we're not going to work with the Pentagon on this particular issue, whereas Microsoft, in the face of protests, has said we are going to continue to work with the government. Do you is one decision better than the other, or?
I think it shows a little bit of the DNA of the company. Microsoft is used to producing tools and doesn't worry as much about, you know, okay, we want to enable and empower our customers. I think it does show the power that individual engineers, designers, product managers have within Silicon Valley to make new changes happen within their company. The only thing that I would say is if anybody's going to vote with their feet, we have lots of non-partisan things that will help make things work better if people want to try a different flavor of public service.
So what are your top priorities for the U.S. digital service this year?
We're thinking very hard about veterans. We're thinking about how to improve healthcare. There's a ton of things that can be done, like moving service members' families from one part of the country to another. It's way more stressful than it needs to be. We recently were honored to partner with Veterans Affairs to help rebuild a new website called va.gov that makes it much easier for veterans to access their benefits.
The diversity statistics of the U.S. digital service are actually quite impressive. You've got 50% women, 60% women in leadership, and you have 180 technologists across multiple different agencies. So how did you do that when Google and Facebook and all of these very wealthy tech companies can't figure it out?
Yeah, certainly there's a full court press. We go to conferences like Grace Hopper, Celebration of Women in Computing, Lesbians Who Tech, Afrotech, all those sorts of places. But we also recruit from across the country, not just Silicon Valley. We want to go to Tucson, Arizona. We want to go to Columbus, Ohio. And what we have found is we give better results to our people that we work with when we better represent America. And so we get to not only be able to advertise our mission and our impact and the sorts of things that government can do well, but we can also say, you know what, you can come and have a leadership responsibility here.